The first time the Duke heard her name, it came from an old woman beside a fire, burning down to nothing. "Find a woman worthy of you," his mother said, her frail hands, folded beneath a quilt, thinned by decades of hard winters. Not one chasing titles, not one trained to curtsy in gilded rooms. Find the one who still knows how to hold steady when the world turns mean. Those words stayed with him long after the funeral bells went silent. For close to 2 years, he crossed through towns, endured dinners, sat through introductions arranged by wealthy families more interested in acreage and bloodlines than truth. Every mother thrust her daughter forward. Every father spoke of property and pedigree. Yet each time he rode away, the quiet inside him only deepened. By the time autumn settled into the northern valleys, people had started whispering about the Duke who could not choose a wife. Some called him proud, others called him broken. None of them knew about the promise made at his mother's bedside. Far from the crowded estates and polished city avenues stood a small farming town, pressed tight between dense woods and open pasture. Wagons seldom stopped there unless they carried business with the lumber camps or cattle traders. Winters struck hard, and people learned young how to survive on little. That was where he first heard of her. It happened inside a dusty general store, while rain beat against the roof overhead. The Duke had stopped only to rest his horse and warm his hands. Near the counter, 2 older women spoke softly while sorting dried beans into cloth sacks. "Quote 2, one said. "Quote 3, the other answered. Most folks would have gone bitter. The Duke paid no mind at first, until the next sentence reached him. "Best woman in 3 counties, if you ask me. Shame life never gave her much in return." Something in their voices made him glance up. He asked nothing then, but later that evening, the innkeeper mentioned her too. A young woman living alone near the edge of the woods, her father dead, her brothers gone west chasing silver. A woman known more for her kindness than her beauty, though some said she carried both in equal measure. Quote 4. The innkeeper cautioned, wiping a glass cup with a stained rag. Quote _5__. The Duke listened without speaking. Outside, cold winds swept the empty road bare. Most men of his station would have laughed at the notion of riding miles on small-town gossip. Yet his mother's words rose again, unbidden, sharp. "Find a woman worthy of you." Before sunrise the next morning, he saddled his horse and turned north. The road grew rougher with every mile. Trees pressed close along the narrow trail. Patches of old snow clung to the shadows beneath them. By afternoon, clouds rolled low across the hills, turning everything grey and still. When he finally reached the property the innkeeper described, he nearly believed he had come to the wrong place. The farmhouse was small, weathered by seasons. One section of fence leaned badly inward. Smoke drifted thin from the chimney. Near the barn stood a woman splitting firewood alone. Sleeves rolled past her wrists despite the cold. She did not look toward the road, did not hurry to greet him, did not smile at expensive clothes or a polished saddle. She simply kept working. The Duke sat motionless atop his horse, watching her longer than he intended. Something different lived in the way she moved, something steady. Then shouting broke through the trees behind him. A rider came tearing down the trail. "Miss!" the man called out breathlessly toward the farmhouse. "You need to leave now. They've come back for the land." The woman went still. For the first time, fear moved across her face, and the Duke understood he had ridden into something far more dangerous than a simple visit. The rider's horse stumbled to a halt near the fence, chest heaving from the long run through timber. Mud caked the animal's legs, and the man in the saddle looked pale beneath the sharp wind. "They're already near the lower creek," he warned again. I counted 3 wagons, men carrying papers from the county office. The woman set the axe down slowly. Her grip stayed tight around the handle. Her eyes drifted toward the distant hills beyond the tree line, as though she already knew exactly who was coming. "They promised to return before winter," she said, her voice barely rising above the wind. The Duke swung down from his horse without breaking his gaze from her. This close, he could read the exhaustion hiding beneath that steady expression. She couldn't have been past 25, but her face carried a weight meant for someone twice her age, the kind that settles in when burdens never lift. "He 11?" he asked. She looked at him fully for the first time. Her eyes moved across his coat, his gloves, the polished silver mounted on his saddle. In towns like this, wealth drew either envy or distrust. She offered neither. 12, she answered. The rider pulled his hat from his head, fingers restless. 13. 14, she said. 15. The Duke listened without interrupting. Something sat crooked in this already. Rich men thrived on confusion, lost papers, relentless pressure, wearing down families too bone-tired to resist. He'd watched it happen across farming counties. Widows and daughters with no shield between them and the wolves. The woman wiped her palms against her skirt and moved toward the porch. "You should both come inside before the storm gets here." Thunder grumbled low across the horizon as they stepped into the farmhouse. Plain rooms, clean floors, a kettle warming near the stove, blankets folded tight across a wooden chair. No luxury anywhere, but every surface bore the marks of labor and attention. The Duke's eyes found a bundle of letters bound with string near the window, most still sealed. "Quote 17, he asked. "Quote 18, she said, pouring hot water into 3 cups. "Quote 19. No grief in her voice, just the flat tone of someone long past mourning. The rider gave his name as Eli, a worker from the neighboring mill. He'd known her family since he was a boy. Rain hammered the roof as he laid out what the men wanted with the property. "They've been swallowing land across the whole valley," Eli said. "Small farms mostly, families without lawyers. They lose everything before they can even read the contracts." The Duke settled back in his chair. "Who's behind it?" "A businessman connected to the Eastern Railroad," Eli said. "Though word is someone else pulls the strings, someone with deeper pockets." Clara set a cup near the Duke but stayed on her feet. "My father wouldn't sell while he lived," she said. "Once he was gone, the offers turned into threats." Silence filled the room. Only rain against glass. Only fire popping in the stove. The Duke watched her now with sharper eyes. She spoke without reaching for pity. Even staring down the loss of her home, she held herself with that same iron composure he'd noticed outside by the woodpile. "Quote 27, he asked. She paused, as if names had stopped carrying weight for her long ago. The simplicity of it struck him after the long road that had brought him here. Clara turned sharply toward the window. Through rain-streaked glass, dark shapes of wagons emerged along the distant road. Quote, _29. Eli breathed. The Duke rose to his feet. 3 wagons ground closer through the downpour, flanked by mounted riders in dark coats. Even at a distance, something cold and deliberate hung around them like smoke. Clara's jaw tightened. Fear still lived beneath it. "You don't have to involve yourself," she told the Duke. He'd come here by accident. But his mother's face surfaced again. Not her words this time. The look in her eyes when she spoke them. "Find a woman worthy of you." Outside, wagon wheels churned through soaked earth and stopped at the front gate. One man climbed down, clutching a leather case under his arm. Another carried a rifle slung across his shoulder, barrel aimed at the mud. The Duke stepped closer to the glass. His expression shifted. Standing beside those wagons was a face he knew from the capital. A man linked to powerful families, stolen land disputes, scandals smothered under money. And now that man stood at Clara's gate. The moment Clara saw them gathered beyond her fence, she squared her shoulders, the posture of a woman who had weathered this particular storm more times than anyone should. Eli muttered something low and moved back from the window. Quote 31. Quote 32, Clara said, her voice low. The Duke kept his gaze locked on the man beside the wagons. He knew that figure from the capital. Tall, angular face, always wrapped in dark coats regardless of season. Vernon Halley. Men with money called him Mr. Halley, out of caution, not respect. Halley never showed where trouble brewed. He sent others. If he'd ridden all the way into this valley himself, the ground beneath Clara's farmhouse was worth far more than anyone suspected. A heavy fist struck the front door. Clara moved toward it before either man could stop her. She pulled it open, and cold rain drove inside on the wind. Halley removed his gloves with deliberate slowness, his expression steady enough to make the skin crawl. Quote, 34, he said pleasantly. Quote, 35. Quote, 36, she answered. Quote, 37. Haller offered a thin smile. 2 county officers stood behind him, and beside them, a stranger, clutching a leather folder swollen with documents. The officers would not meet Clara's eyes, which told the Duke everything he needed to know. Small towns buckled under wealthy men. Then Haller's gaze drifted past Clara toward the fireplace, toward the Duke. For the first time, that composure cracked, just slightly. Quote, 39. Quote, Haller said, measuring each word. Quote, 40. Quote, the Duke stepped closer. Quote, 41. Quote, 42. Haller replied, smooth as oiled leather. Quote, 43. Clara's jaw went rigid. Strange how business always rides in with armed men. One officer cleared his throat and unfolded a document. He explained that debts tied to Clara's father granted the Eastern Railroad legal claim to portions of her property. If payment failed before first snowfall, the land would transfer. The Duke listened without moving. Something about the figures felt wrong. The debt had nearly doubled in months. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 45, underscore. Underscore, Clara said instantly. The man with the papers still wouldn't look at her. It's what the records show. Eli stepped forward, fury tightening his shoulders. Everyone in this valley knows her father kept receipts. Yes, Clara said suddenly. The room went still as stone. My father locked them away before he died. Halley's face shifted, barely and only for a heartbeat. But the Duke caught it, a flash of something close to worry. Quote, 50 Hallie said. Clara hesitated. That single pause told the Duke everything. The papers were either lost or hidden somewhere beyond her reach. Silence stretched until it ached. Then Hallie adjusted his coat and stepped back toward the rain. Quote, 51, quote, he announced. Quote, 52, quote. His gaze settled hard on the Duke. Quiet weight beneath those words. Rumors, leverage, threat. The Duke had spent years sidestepping political games and marriage schemes among powerful families. Yet standing here in Clara's farmhouse, he felt closer to real danger than he ever had among aristocrats. The men rode off. Silence reclaimed the house. Rain drummed against the windows. Clara stood near the doorway, staring out into the black. "You know him," she said without turning. "Yes, and he knows you." The Duke did not answer right away. "My family has dealt with men like Hallie for years," he admitted finally. "They build fortunes by stripping land from people too weak to fight." Eli dropped into a chair at the table. "Then why would someone that powerful want this farm so badly?" No one spoke. But later that evening, while helping Clara brace the barn against the worsening storm, the Duke noticed something at the northern edge of the property. Fresh, wooden stakes driven deep into the earth past the creek. Railroad markings. His eyes narrowed. The tracks planned for this valley ran nowhere near here, not according to any public map. Yet someone had already surveyed Clara's land in secret, which meant Halle was concealing something far larger than unpaid debts. Thunder growled above them as Clara followed his stare toward those distant stakes. Quote, 59, quote, she said, her voice barely above a breath. The Duke turned to her. Quote, 60, quote. Clara dropped her tone lower still, careful, guarded, as though the trees themselves had ears. Wind tore across the valley for most of that night. By morning, the storm had broken, but the air pressing against the farmhouse walls carried a new weight. Clara stood by the kitchen table, studying one of her father's old maps. The Duke watched frost surrender slowly from the window glass. "You honestly think something's buried out there?" She folded the map with deliberate hands. "My father did." A pause. "And you?" She let out a breath. "When I was young, I believed it was just a farmer's tale, something to keep hope breathing through lean years." Her jaw tightened. "Then men like Hallie began purchasing every parcel around us. Families pushed out quietly. Some vanished in the night after refusing his offers." Eli came through the door with an armload of split wood. His face was drawn tight. "Word's already spreading in town," he said. "People saw Hallie's wagons yesterday. Most figure the county's coming to take this farm." Clara's gaze dropped, but she held her silence. The Duke marked it, the way she swallowed fear whole rather than speak it. Even now, with everything bearing down, she carried more concern for others than herself. That afternoon, the Duke rode out with Eli toward the lower creek to study the railroad markers up close. Frost sheeted the ground beneath bare trees. The woods held still, nothing moving except crows wheeling far above. At the creek bank, they found more than wooden stakes. Fresh gouges scarred the hillside. Someone had already been digging through this valley under cover of darkness. Eli dropped to his haunches near the torn earth. Quote, 69, The Duke's expression hardened. Shovel cuts, lantern oil staining the dirt, boot tracks pressed deep. Halley's men were searching for something. Farther along the ridge, the Duke caught smoke threading upward through the trees to the north. Tucked between dense pines sat a small camp. 2 wagons, armed men watching the valley below. Eli swore under his breath. Quote 70. Before they could press forward, voices carried from the camp. Quote 71, a man said. Quote 72. Quote 73, came a second voice. The reply landed cold as iron. Quote 74. The Duke and Eli locked eyes. The receipts were real. They rode hard back to the farmhouse that evening. Clara heard them out without a word. When they finished, silence filled the room before she spoke. Underscore, underscore, quote underscore 75, underscore, underscore. She moved toward the staircase slowly, drawn by something older than thought. The Duke followed her up with a lantern. The second floor held 2 cramped bedrooms and an attic crowded with old trunks, rusted tools, quilts folded thick with dust across warped shelves. They searched for hours while night closed around the house. Clara sifted through drawers of yellowed letters. The Duke pried at loose floorboards near the attic wall. Nothing. Clara finally sank against an old wooden chest. The calm she'd carried cracked. "They're gone," she whispered. "Maybe Halley already has them." The Duke knelt beside a narrow table near the window. One leg sat uneven against the floor. He shifted it. Something small dropped beneath. A brass key, dark with rust. Clara's eyes fixed on it instantly. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 79, underscore, underscore. She seized the lantern and moved fast toward the far attic corner, where an old wardrobe stood draped in blankets. Behind it, a narrow locked door, nearly invisible against the wallboards. Her fingers shook as she fitted the key into the lock. It turned with a clean click. Inside the cramped space sat a wooden box wrapped in cloth. For the first time since the Duke had come to this farmhouse, hope broke openly across Clara's face. Before her hands could reach the box, a sharp crack split the silence from below. Then another. The front door. Someone was forcing it open. Eli's voice cut up from below like a whip crack. Quote 80. The Duke was already moving toward the attic stairs. Clara pressed the wooden box against her ribs with both hands. Boot heels hammered the porch boards beneath them. A second impact shook the whole frame of the house, lantern flame jumping wild against the walls. Then a voice rose from the ground floor, one they all knew. Quote 81. Quote it called. Quote 82. Quote. Clara's gaze found the Duke. Fear and resolve fought each other across her face. Below, wood screamed and cracked as the front door started giving way. The frame buckled inward, while Eli wrestled a heavy table against it. "Move!" he bellowed toward the attic. "They're through!" The Duke reached Clara as she locked both arms tighter around the box. Color had drained from her cheeks, but her jaw was set. "Another way out?" he asked. She gave a quick nod. Back loft. Stairs down to the barn. Men's voices erupted as the front door finally exploded inward. The Duke snatched the lantern. Clara guided him through a narrow passage behind stacked grain sacks, a gap no one would notice unless they knew. Each step on the hidden stairway groaned beneath their weight as they descended toward the barn. Cold hit them the instant they crossed the threshold. Rain from the earlier storm had turned the yard into thick, sucking mud. Inside the house, Halley's men ripped through drawers and overturned furniture, hunting for what was no longer there. Eli slipped out moments after, an old rifle clutched in his fists. His breath came ragged. "They're tearing through every room," he said, but Halley stayed inside. He believes the papers haven't left the house. The Duke looked at Clara. "Then we use that." She understood without another word. Together, they crossed into the barn. Clara set the wooden box on a scarred work table. Her fingers shook as she pried the lid open. Folded receipts, property records, county documents bound tight with ribbon, stacks of them. And beneath everything, a leather journal worn soft with years. Clara opened it with care. "My father's notes." The Duke stepped beside her as she turned page after page. Payment records, land agreements, names tied to every corner of the valley. But the final pages held something different entirely. Railroad surveys, hidden mineral reports, secret purchase agreements, all connected to the Eastern Railroad. The Duke's face went hard as he read. Haller and a circle of wealthy investors had found silver deposits running beneath the valley years before. Rather than deal honestly with landowners, they'd schemed to take the farms cheap, manufactured debts, legal threats, quiet strangulation. "That's why they wanted the land," Eli said through his teeth. Clara swallowed. "My father discovered the truth. They spent years trying to bury him for it," the Duke finished. Before another word passed between them, boots crunched the mud outside. Halley's voice carried through the dark. __quote, _93, __. The barn doors swung open, slow, deliberate. Halley stepped through with 2 men at his back. His expression held its usual calm, but the patience underneath had burned away. Quote, "94, he said, quiet as a coffin nail. The Duke placed himself between Halley and Clara. Quote, 95. His voice carried no heat, only certainty. Anger broke across Halley's face for the first time, open and ugly. "You believe powerful men fall over old receipts?" "No," Clara answered from behind the Duke, steady as stone. "But lies do." Silence owned the barn. Then, from outside, hoofbeats, dozens of them. Halley turned sharp toward the doors as townspeople rode into the yard. Lanterns swung through the wet darkness. Eli smiled. "First time all night." "Sent word before sunset," he said. "People finally got sick of living scared." Farmers filled the yard. Mill workers, ranch families. Some Haller had threatened personally. Others had been driven off neighboring land years before. And standing among them, the county officers who had refused to meet Clara's eyes just the day prior. Now they looked straight at Haller. One officer stepped forward, slow and deliberate. __quote, _102, __. Haller scanned the crowded yard, reading every face, and finding in each one the same thing: the end of his reach. By dawn, he and his men sat in irons. The false records pulled from their wagons lay spread across the sheriff's desk like a confession written in ink and greed. Word of the Valley scandal moved fast, across the state, into the capital itself, all within days. Farms, seized under fraudulent claims, returned to their rightful owners. The Eastern Railroad project ground to a halt. And Clara's father, his name at last, stood clean. Weeks passed. Winter laid its white silence over the valley. Smoke curled from the farmhouse chimney, thin and steady against a pale sky. Townspeople worked nearby, mending fences the storms had torn down. The Duke stood beside Clara on the porch. Children's laughter carried sharp across the frozen yard. "You could return to the capital now," she said. Quiet. No pressure in it. "I could," he said. Neither turned away. For the first time in years, something inside him had gone still. Not empty. Still. The restlessness that had driven him mile after mile, town after town. Gone. The journey his mother once set him upon had not ended in gilded ballrooms or among landed families of influence. It ended here, beside a quiet farmhouse tucked against the tree line. He understood now what she meant. A worthy woman was not measured by name or station. She was measured by courage, by kindness, by the iron it took to stand upright when the world pressed down hard. Spring brought another gathering to the valley. Not for land disputes, not for railroad claims. A wedding, held beneath open sky, the whole town present. Clara smiled beside him while church bells rang out across the hills, their sound rolling slow over the ridgeline. The miles he had ridden to find her had delivered him not only to love, but to the kind of life no amount of wealth could purchase. Subscribe to the channel for more stories. Your support keeps them alive. Leave a comment. Tell me what you felt and what kind of story you want next. See you in the next one.